The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand over your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your backs on one who wants to borrow. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I want to begin my homily this morning by asking you to picture a familiar household scene. It's the end of a busy day. The family has just finished their evening meal, and the mother says to one of her teenage daughters, "Becky, would you please come and wash the dishes and clean the kitchen?" But Becky responds by saying, "Well, why me? I did it last time. Besides, I have schoolwork to do. What about Alice? She never has to help." And then Alice fires back, "Becky, that's not true, and you know it. Last week I did the dishes 3 times, and you did them only once." And so more heated words are exchanged, and the situation is well on its way to becoming World War III. But then the father steps in and issues an ultimatum. "Becky, I don't want to hear any more about it. You get up right now and do what your mother asked you to do." So Becky, in sullen silence, drags herself to the task and does a halfway decent job of cleaning the kitchen, being very careful not to do a bit more than the bare minimum. And the rest of the evening, she's terribly unhappy, and part of her unhappiness spills over into everyone else in the house. Now let's replay that same scene with a slightly different twist. Go back to the place where the mother asks Becky to do the dishes. This time she answers, "Okay, Mom," and with a friendly conversation goes to work. She not only washes the dishes, but scours the toughest spots and pans and even cleans the stove. From the kitchen, she inquires whether her mother and father would like another cup of coffee. They answer in the affirmative, and she serves it with a smile. They receive it with gratitude. When the task is finished, Becky is happy. Part of her happiness overflows into the entire family. Now, I told that little story not to single out teenagers, but because it's a parable of life. It's a parable of life. It's the very thing Jesus was talking about in our gospel reading when he said, "Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, Go with him 2 miles. With that simple statement, Jesus is reminding you and me that all of life is divided into 2 categories: the compulsory and the voluntary. There are some things we have to do, whether we want to or not. And there are other things we can do, but only if we choose to do them. You see, Becky is really a picture of every one of us. We all get kitchen duty sometimes, or something like it. Life makes certain demands of us that we have to meet. But we have an option as to how we meet them. We could meet our responsibility reluctantly, grudgingly, meeting only the minimum requirements and nothing more. Or we can do our duty gladly and then go beyond it, not only washing the dishes, but scouring the pots and pans, cleaning the stove, serving the extra coffee. And the difference between those 2 options is profound. If we spend our days within the narrow limits of that first mile, life will always be drab and dull duty. But if we have the courage and the good sense to walk the second mile, life will be transformed into a privilege that leads to happiness. Now let's take this principle and seek to apply it to 2 areas of our lives. Consider it first in the category of time. This is the most inevitable of inevitable things. The clock keeps ticking. The calendar keeps turning. Time keeps passing, whether we like it or not. We're all getting older, whether we want to or not. And if we live long enough, someday we will all get real old. Our bodies will yield to the ravages of time. Now, in this we have no choice. It's compulsory. Our only option is, how do we handle it? We could approach our life with the first mile spirit, resenting and resisting every step of the way. We can lie about our age, we can dig in our heels and pretend that we'll be forever young. Of course, that will not change anything. Time will keep right on marching and dragging us along with it. We will still get old. And there's a good possibility that we will also become bitter as well. On the other hand, we could walk with time in the spirit of the second mile. We could make friends with it. We could enjoy every stage of the journey. We could recognize that time not only erodes our physical strength, but also has the power to enlarge our minds and enrich our lives. We will, of course, still get old, but we will not go sour. Since we have to walk with time, the only thing that can save our souls from bitterness is the voluntary spirit of the second mile. Then think of this principle as it applies to our homes. To belong to a family is to be bound by certain minimum obligations. If a man is to function as a husband and a father, there are certain things that he must do, certain responsibilities that he must accept. Same is true of a wife and a mother. And on another level, the same is true for the children. And there are households where these minimum requirements mark the outer limits of a family's life. Each member does just as much as he or she has to do and no more. They live in the spirit of the first mile. And they end up with a first mile home. This is, I suppose, better than nothing, but it's rather a poor excuse for family life. Real homes are always built on the second mile. It's the unanticipated courtesy, the unexpected gift, the unsolicited thoughtfulness that makes husbands and wives into lovers and friends. It's the listening ear, the understanding heart, the fair discipline, the gentle encouragement, the honest apology, and the wholehearted forgiveness that forges bonds of trust between parents and children. And those things, my friends, cannot be forced. They can only be given. You will not find them anywhere but in the second mile. In this world, there are few things more pathetic than a first-mile family, where each member lives by the law of minimum requirement. But one of the most beautiful sights on the face of the earth is the second-mile family, where people do and give more than they have to, just because they choose to. So Jesus said, should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Where are you living your life? In the first mile or the second? In the skimpy minimum of the compulsory or the abundant flow of the voluntary? Perhaps there are some adjustments to be made.